When something breaks a person, not in the dramatic sense that makes a good story, but in the quiet, accumulated sense of having been through enough that the world no longer feels entirely safe. Something begins happening inside their mind that they didn't authorize and often don't notice. The behavior changes before the understanding arrives. They become harder to reach before they know they've retreated. They find themselves observing social situations from a slight internal distance before they've consciously decided to. And when someone finally names it, you're so guarded, you're so private, you're so hard to read, they don't quite know how to explain that this isn't a choice they made. It is something that happened to them, slowly, without announcement, in response to things that required a response. The mind, when it has been broken by enough, does not announce that it is changing its operating model. It simply begins to, and the first thing it changes is how much of itself it makes available. Psychology calls this emotional withdrawal, not the depressive kind, but the adaptive kind, the quiet, structural reorganization of how much of the inner world is accessible to people who haven't demonstrated they know how to hold it. It is the nervous system's response to the specific pain of having offered something genuine and had it received carelessly, not once, enough times that a pattern was registered, enough times that the pattern became a policy, and the policy, though it runs beneath conscious awareness, shapes everything about how the person moves through social life from that point forward. Picture this. You're in a group. The conversation becomes personal. People around you are sharing freely. Relationship dynamics, family difficulties, things that in another context would feel intimate with people they have known for an hour. And something inside you goes quiet. Not cold, not judgmental, just still, observing, taking note of how information moves in this room, who handles it with care, and who treats it as social currency. Whether any of this is a space where the real version of you would be safe to surface. And it isn't an active decision. It happens before you've decided anything. The assessment completes before the question was consciously asked. This is what living with a carefully managed interior looks like from the inside. Not guarded in the dramatic sense, simply calibrated. Specifically, precisely calibrated by a history that gives you information about what happens when calibration isn't applied. If this is landing somewhere in you, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find conversations like this one. And if understanding what life's breaking points actually build inside a person is something you want more of, subscribing makes that work possible. Because when life breaks you, the mind begins several specific processes, each of which shapes behavior in ways that are entirely invisible to the people who encounter you, and often partially invisible to yourself. The first process is the development of what psychologists call trust hierarchies. Not a conscious ranking of people, but a neurologically automatic system for calibrating how much access is appropriate based on accumulated behavioral evidence. The person who has been through enough develops a sensitivity to trust signals that others rarely notice. How someone talks about people who aren't in the room, whether they honor things said in confidence, how they respond when someone shows difficulty. These signals, processed automatically, determine how much of the real interior is made available. And the result is the tiered experience of this person that others describe without understanding, warm with almost everyone, genuinely open with almost nobody, not because the warmth is a performance, because the openness has a different threshold than it used to. The second process is the discovery that silence is a form of stability. For many people, sharing produces relief. The discomfort of carrying something is reduced when it is given to someone else to hold. For someone who has learned that not everyone holds things well, this mechanism inverts. Sharing can produce more anxiety than carrying, not because the content is dangerous, but because extending trust requires relinquishing control over what is done with what is shared. And control. For a mind that learned control was often the only available form of safety, is not easily surrendered. The person who goes quiet in personal conversations isn't avoiding intimacy. They're protecting the interior until the evidence says it's safe to open it. The third process is the development of a finely calibrated empathy that runs in one direction. When life has broken you in relational ways through people who took more than they gave, relationships that cost more than they returned, intimacies that produced vulnerability rather than safety, you develop an extraordinary accuracy at reading what other people need. You can sense when someone is not okay before they have said anything. You know how to say the exact thing that makes someone feel less alone, but you hold other people's pain with a steadiness that surprises them. And you have developed, simultaneously, a near-complete inability to allow anyone to do the same for you. The empathy flows outward because that direction has never been the one that hurt you. The fourth process is the quiet, automatic audit of every social environment. The person who has been through enough walks into rooms and conducts, without deliberate effort, an ongoing assessment of who in the space operates with integrity and who doesn't, who manages other people's vulnerabilities with care, and who monetizes them, who will remember what you said in 3 months, and who will forget it before the conversation ends. This isn't paranoia. It is calibrated pattern recognition from someone whose history gave them very specific reasons to pay attention to these distinctions. And the audit is so automatic, so below the level of conscious processing, that the person often doesn't know they've done it until they find themselves more relaxed in the presence of one person than another and can't immediately explain why. The fifth process is the recalibration of what rest means. For most people, rest is the absence of demand. For someone who has been through enough, rest is often something more specific, the absence of monitoring. The rare experience of being in a relationship or a space where the vigilance can actually decrease, where they don't need to maintain the assessment, track the emotional temperature, or manage how much of themselves is showing. These moments, genuinely uncommon for people who have this history, produce a quality of relief that other people may never fully understand, because they have never known what it is to be in a constant low-level version of readiness that they couldn't name until it briefly stopped. Here is the paradox that holds all 5 of these processes together. The mind that life broke, that developed these systems, this calibration, this careful management of access, did not become less capable of connection through those adaptations. In most cases, it became more capable of a specific, rarer kind, because the trust that survives the assessment process, the intimacy that builds slowly enough to be genuine, the relationships that develop over the time it takes for the evidence to accumulate, these tend to be qualitatively different, from connections built on immediate openness and social performance, harder to reach, worth reaching. The person who has been through enough and built all of this is not broken in the sense of being incomplete. They are calibrated in the sense of having learned something real about what genuine safety requires and having declined to pretend that they haven't. Growth does not require a witness. Healing does not need an audience, and the version of connection that is earned slowly, in the specific privacy of demonstrated trustworthiness, that version is not a consolation prize for someone who couldn't manage the other kind. It is the thing itself. What is something about how you connect with people now that you can trace directly to something that broke you earlier? And would you change it if you could? Hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.